How many of you have ever attended a meeting called New Vendor Kickoff? I mean, you wanted to decline it because the quarter was already planned, but couldn't because your boss was also invited. So you didn't. And now you're watching a business stakeholder, genuinely excited, and honestly, they have earned it. Share their screen and say the sentence every IM architect must have heard 100 times. We just signed the contract. Legal is done. Procurement is done. We need everyone provisioned by end of month. And now the room goes quiet. But this is not a good kind of quiet. This is the kind of quiet where the IAM architect, and maybe that's you, is running about 15 questions at once. And not one of them has an obvious answer. You have questions like, does this app even support SCIM? Should the IGA platform provision it? Or should the IDP provision it? Does this need governance? Or is it just life cycle? What happens to the 200 accounts that already exists in there? Who approves the access? And what does deprovisioning look like? How fast does access have to disappear when someone walks out the door? Now, here is the thing about that meeting, because I have, like yourself, been in hundreds of those meetings. It happens in every enterprise. And when it doesn't happen, when the app just quietly goes live without anyone asking those questions, you haven't skipped the cost, you have deferred it. And I promise you, it comes back later with interest. And we have a name for that. That's called audit debt. In the last episode, we talked about SCIM, the protocol that finally made provisioning grow up. If you haven't heard it, I would strongly recommend you to go back and hear it. But if you're familiar with SCIM, you know that we have built the pipes, right? Today, we answer the question SCIM never answers. When a new application shows up, who actually pulls the trigger? Who provisions it? How and why? The same way every single time. I am Rohit. This is Identity Navigator. Let's get into this. So, before we build the decision tree, let's set the scene because the tools you have determine which decisions are even available to you. We have talked about, or we are talking about an architecture pattern that's extremely common in the enterprise right now. There are three layers to it. Layer one is your IGA platform, your Oracle Identity Managers or SailPoints or Savients of the world. This is your governance layer. City Hall, if you want a metaphor, joiner, mover, labor, orchestration, role management, access request workflows, access certifications, permits, records, inspections. Layer 2 is your identity provider, your Microsoft Entra, ID, or Okta. This is your authentication and directory layer, the SSO, MFA, right? The utility company doesn't ask why a building needs power, it just connects it. This is like a utility company. And layer three is your application being onboarded with its own capabilities, its own user model, and let's be honest, its own opinion about how it wants to receive identity data. Now, here is what makes this genuinely interesting. And it's the tension at the heart of the whole episode. In this stack, you have two systems that can provision the target application. The IGA platform can do it, the IDP can do it, and they speak the same protocol. That's the SCIM story from last time. But they have completely different strengths, different speed, and different ideas about what done means. So your definition of done differs system to system here. So if the last episode answered how does the account get created, SCIM, standardized, boring, beautiful. But what SCIM never answered is who decides and who is accountable. Now, that's not a protocol question. That's an architecture question. An architecture question deserves better than whoever speaks up first in the meeting. Because that's how most team actually decides this today. Gut feel, president, the loudest voice in the room. And they decide it differently every time. Which means every app onboarding is a snowflake and every audit becomes a scavenger hunt. This is also compounded by the principle of this application onboarding factory that every vendor is trying to sell you today, because they try to put things into buckets which sometimes do not belong together. Sometimes your business analyst or your product people need to be updated or educated as well. And because the identity architect cannot be in every room where these meetings happen. So there are a lot of anti patterns here. And here is the uncomfortable part: both defaults fail. Pick the IDP because it's fast and it fails one way, and pick the IGA because it is thorough and it fails a completely different way. You usually don't find out at go live. You find out 18 months later in an audit room or an incident review. So I want to show you today exactly what that looks like. So before the framework, let's talk about two stories. Quick ground rules before I start though. Both of these stories are composites. Details changed, companies blended, pattern 100% real. If one of them sounds uncomfortably like your organization, that's not a coincidence. That's the point. So, story one is about a mid sized company uh, that signs a sales engagement platform. You know the type. It plugs into the CRM, tracks outreach, runs the sequence. The sales VP wanted it live yesterday. And the identity provider admin, who is sharp, helpful, slightly overworked, looks at the request and sees an easy win. The app has a pre-built integration sitting right there in the Okta catalog, SCIM support, ready to go. So that afternoon, they do what the toolings make easy. Clip on provisioning, point it at a group, and everyone in the sales org gets access. And they go home feeling like a hero. And honestly, they kind of were. 200 people provisioned in a day, no ticket, no waiting. The business is thrilled. This is exactly what modern identity tooling is supposed to feel like. And now 18 months pass. The group rules gets edited twice by two different admins for two different reasons nobody actually wrote down. So the contractors get nested in, and the app itself quietly grows up. It starts syncing customer contact data back from the CRM, real names, real emails, real deal information. The sales productivity tool is now functionally a system holding customer PII, which is exactly when it shows up in the SOC 2 scoping call. And the auditor asks the question auditors always ask: so show me who approved access to this application for these 412 users and when. And the answer, the true, complete, honest answer, is a group rule somebody wrote. No approvals, no request, no certification history. No manager has ever attested that their people need this access because the access was never granted to anyone. It just matched a filter. So, uh, there is silence in the audit room, and that is the audit debt that I was talking about in the cold open. This is an audit debt with interest. And here is the part I need you to sit with. Nothing malfunctioned here. The IDP did exactly what it was configured to do: fast, reliable, and flawless. The engine didn't fail, the assignment did. Nobody asked whether this app needed governance because there was no moment in the process where that question lived. Now, I told you that both defaults fail. So, this is the second story about default 2 failing. Okay. So, different company, opposite instinct. This one runs a serious IGA program. And when they onboard their financial reporting system, they do it right. They did it right. I mean, genuinely right. Access request with approvals, role modeled, quarterly certifications, where manager actually review instead of rubber stamping. Every account traceable to a decision. If the auditor from story one walked into this room, the team would smile and pull the report. The IGA platform owned provisioning end to end, including reprovisioning, on its scheduled task cycle, because that's how this platform works. An event lands, the next lifecycle tasks picks it up, and provisioning executes. And then comes a Friday. it's an unfortunate Friday because an employee is terminated for cause. They are walked out of the building at 9:15 in the morning. HR does everything by the book. The termination hits workday before 9:30. At 10 o'clock, the security team asks the question security team always asks on for cause termination. Is the access cut? And the honest answer is it will be. Because the lifecycle tasks run on a schedule, the termination has to get picked up, processed, propagated. The actual deprovision lands in the financial system a little after 2 in the afternoon. That is nearly 5 hours. Valid credentials to a financial system held by someone who was escorted out of the building by everyone whose job is to worried. Now, if anything bad happened in those 5 hours, in this composite, no. And you can also talk about defense in depth or zero trust architecture here. But in some version of this story out in the wild, maybe yes, or definitely yes. Here is the thing, it almost doesn't matter because in the incident review, nobody could defend the window. And when somebody in that review asked, wait, couldn't we have just disabled their SSO account immediately? The room went or should have gone quiet because, yes, obviously that is a great control. And it get discovered in a retro instead of designed into an architecture. And again, nothing malfunctioned. The IGA did exactly what it was built to do governed, auditable, thorough. So the engine didn't fail, the assignment did. Nobody asked how fast access needed to die because there was no moment in the process where that question lived either. So we have seen two failures and one root cause. Let's look at what just happened. Team 1 picked the fast engine and lost the paper trail. Team 2 picked the thorough engine and lost the clock. Opposite choices, but same diseases. Same disease. In both rooms, the who provisions this decision was made once by instinct, by whoever's default won, and it was never examined again. Now, neither engine was wrong, neither team was careless. These are good tools operated by good people. The failure lives entirely in the unasked questions. Hold on to the shape of this because it comes back at the end of the episode. I'll hopefully tie it all back together because the IDP is fundamentally a speed layer and the IGA is fundamentally a governance layer. Assign an app to the wrong layer or the one layer where it when it needed both and you don't find out at go live. You find out 18 months later in an audit room or an incident review. So, one more piece of context, and I'll keep it brutally short because the SCIM episode already toured this landscape. We touched on this in much more detail. Your specific IGA platform tilts the decision, right? So, your OIM's 20 years of workflow orchestration depth, multi step approval, custom logic, it will model anything. But a connector catalog that doesn't move at SaaS speed and changes that cost your development cycles. SailPoint Identity IQ built around the identity cube, one unified view of every account and entitlement a person holds, aggregated from every connected system, with governance depth as the whole point. And its SCIM connector keeps every provisioning decision and audit trail inside the platform at the price of real administrative overhead. Your Saviynt is your cloud first with a large pre-built application catalog, your connectors, attribute mappings, entitlement schemas ready to go, and unusually deep application level governance out of the box. That's a tool though. Longer version in the show notes. Because the important thing isn't the vendor comparison. It's when the framework says the IGA must be in the chain, your IGA's strength and cost shapes how you wire it. And this is another anti-pattern that I have seen with many application or identity architects is that they treat all of these tools as same. But all of these tools internally have their own strengths and weaknesses. So even though they're all IGA tools, you have to identify the differences that that your architecture decision should be because of the difference in the tools. So keep these two stories on your pocket and let's talk about the framework that I have been building towards. Here is how I want you to think about this. Excuse me. Every new application is a job applicant. It wants a role in your environment, and your job is to interview it. So, 5 questions asked in order because each answer routes you somewhere specific. And by the end of the interview, the architecture chooses itself. So, question one: do you speak SCIM 2.0? This is the gate question. Check the vendor's documentation. Look for SCIM in the admin or developer docs. Look for endpoint like /SCIM /V2 and check whether the vendor publishes an integration in the Entra or Okta catalogs. If they do, SCIM support is usually spelled out right there. And if the answer is no, stop. You are no longer making a SCIM decision. You're making a connector decision. Your IGA platform's native connector, a REST connector, a flat file integration, or a custom built. The IDP provisioning path is largely off the table because modern IDP provisioning is SCIM based. Make a note, flag it with the vendor as technical debt politely, but in writing and move on. Now, if yes, so go to the next question. And if you're wondering why SCIM is the gate, that's the entire previous episode. Go listen to it. I will wait. So, question two: does access to this thing requires governance? And I mean governance specifically, not vaguely. Approval workflows, access certification campaigns, role modeling, separation of duties enforcement. Here's the litmus test that I use. Imagine the SOC 2 auditor across the table asking, show me who approved this user's access to this application and when. No, can you answer that? Governance isn't a feeling, it's a paper trail. If the answer is yes, and for anything touching sensitive data, financial data, PII, or regulated content, it should be yes. Then the IGA platform must be in the provisioning chain. They can take two shapes. The IGA provisions directly through its SCIM connector, or the IGA controls who gets assigned to the application in the IDP, and the IDP pushes the SCIM. Either way, governance lives in the IGA. And if the answer is no, this is your low sensitivity productivity tool, collaboration apps, the stuff where access is broadly available, or kind of like birthright, the IDP can own provisioning end to end. Either way, go to the next question. So, question three is a group enough, or does this app have rooms inside? That is your fine grained and coarse grained authorization. So group based access is a front door key. You're a member of this Entra or a group, therefore you get in. That is binary, that is clean. The IDP assigns the group, the SCIM push creates the account. Done. Now entitlement tiers are different. That's when the app has room inside your roles, profiles, permission sets, license type, data across access scopes, and which room you can enter matters enormously. In Salesforce, the gap between a system administrator profile and a read only profile is a chasm. In ServiceNow, an ITSM agent and an end user lives in different universe. In Snowflake, which role you hold literally decides which data you can query. It's a front door app and low sensitivity if your IDP owns provisioning. Configure scheme in Entra or Okta, define the group assignment logic, and just be done with it. But if there are rooms inside, the IGA platform has to be in the chain because those entitlement needs to be requestable, approvable, and certifiable. The IDP cannot model that. The IDP sees the door, the IGA needs to see every room behind it. So some of you might be picking up on this where, as soon as a new application has to be onboarded, you directly jump into the type of connector. You have a SCIM connector and REST-based connector and custom connector. So everything maps to the application on onboarding factory that either you have created or you have bought. Right? But there are decisions that needs to be made before this. And this is what we are trying to identify how those decisions are made. So let's go to question number 4. When someone leaves, how fast the taxes have to die? And frankly, this is like the most obvious question, but this is the question that gets underweighted on the whiteboard. And this becomes a crisis more often than not during an incident. So ask it out loud. When a user is terminated, how quickly must their access to this application be revoked? For a highly sensitive application, your financial records, customer PII, source code, security tooling, the answer might be within 1 hour of the termination hitting the HR system. Now, the uncomfortable follow up, can your IGA platform actually meet that number? OIM and SailPoint both run scheduled provisioning tasks depending on configuration. A termination event might not propagate for 30 minutes, 2 hours, or longer. Meanwhile, Entra ID's SCIM provisioning cycle runs roughly every 30, 20 to 40 minutes, though you can trigger on demand provisioning for a specific user as well. Okta is near real time, typically under 5 minutes from a life cycle event. So if the deprovisioning speed is critical and your IGA cannot hit the SLA, you build a compensating architecture, right? Yeah, then there are 3 options. So let's start with the cleanest option first. So the one, the IGA fire a real-time API call to Entra or Okta on termination, and the IDP immediately pushes the SCIM deprovision. Number 2 is your IGA deprovisions the user's Entra or Okta account directly, disabling their identity provider's identity or IDP identity. Sorry, I said it out weird. Disabling their IDP identity. Blunt, but it cascades to every SCIM connected and SSO gated application at once. And number 3 option or the third option is both the IGA and the IDP keep deprovisioning hooks into the app. The IGA handles governance and the IDP handles speed. More moving parts, more to maintain. I typically do not endorse this architecture unless there is a very specific justification for that. But in all three, remember the rule. IGA makes the decision and IDP delivers the punch. Right. So the fifth question, right, is who is already living in this app? And this question isn't about the future state architecture. It's about the go live risk. Almost every application being onboarded into a governed provisioning model already has users. They get in somehow manually through the app's admin console, through a previous integration that's now being retired. And if you just flip on SCIM provisioning over the top of them, here is what happens. SCIM tries to create account for everyone it believes should exist. Exist an account with slightly different users name, different email formats, different attributes values, duplicates, conflicts, error, a very bad first week. So before go live, they export the existing user population from the application, match it against your IGA identity cube or your IDP directory. You will end up with 3 buckets: your matched identity, your unmatched but active identity, and you should investigate them, or your unmatched with no recent logins, and those are your orphan accounts. Right? So it's archaeology before construction. It's not glamorous, but it's absolutely mandatory, and I've seen very, very few people do it. So that's the interview. 5 questions in order. And now let's run a real candidate through it, right? Because let's get to it. So now let's get back to the meeting. And now it's yours, and you have all the information that we have just discussed. Let's say your stack is SailPoint Identity IQ plus Entra ID, and the app on the table is let's pick an app that everyone has, Salesforce, and run the 5 questions out loud. Okay. So Q1, does not the quarter one. Question one, does Salesforce speak SCIM 2.0? Yes. Well documented SCIM 2.0 endpoint supporting users and groups, and both IDPs ship pre-built integration. Entra has an enterprise application template for Salesforce, and also Okta has a Salesforce connector in the OIM. So nobody is building anything custom here. Okay, that's cool. Question two, does Salesforce access requires governance? And the answer is almost certainly. Two, it's your CRM, customer data, pipeline data, contract value, account relationship. In most enterprises, Salesforce sits squarely in SOC 2 scope. So managers needs to attest, and everything needs to be there. So you are not provisioning Salesforce purely of Entra group membership with no governance layer. Okay, because we need governance here. Question 3: are there rooms inside? Right, we spoke about fine grained. So there are rooms obviously in Salesforce. You have profiles like system administrator and standard users and read only. Your permission sets tagged on top of profiles. Your license type, Salesforce, Salesforce platform, community, and the distance between a system administrator profile and a read only profile with a no permission set is not a nuance. It's everything versus look, don't touch. So these entitlements needs to get modeled in SailPoint. They needs to be requestable, approvable, certifiable. So honesty checkpoint, and this is where Saviynt would hand you a head start. Its Salesforce connector pre-models profiles and permission sets as governed entitlement out of the box. In IIQ, you are building that entitlement schema yourself. So if your team knows IIQ, it's not hard, but it's work Saviynt gives you for free, essentially. Next, how fast does access have to die? Say your security policy reads terminated employees lose Salesforce access within 4 hours of termination in workday. Now, security policies are never this nuanced, but you need to understand your critical applications or top tier applications and PII data. So you need to do some thinking of your own or reach out to privacy or uh, legal folks to understand this. So can IIQ on a standard schedule provisioning cycle make 4 hours? Probably, but probably is not an architecture. Run the math on your actual task schedule. If your lifecycle events task runs every 2 hours and there is a processing time on top of that, 4 hours is tighter than it sounds. The safer build, configure IIQ to fire an immediate provisioning action on termination events. So IIQ supports this through lifecycle events triggers and instead of waiting for the next scheduled run. So you have to test it out. Okay. Um, Measure the real elapsed time from workday terminations to Salesforce account deactivation and write that number down because that number is going to appear in your SOC 2 audit. And even if that doesn't clear the bar, add the belt to the suspenders on termination. IIQ disables the user Entra account immediately. SSO goes dark. Even if the SCIM deprovision lags a few minutes, the person cannot authenticate into Salesforce or anything else, honestly. That's who's already living in Salesforce? Everyone. Salesforce has been in the building for years. Accounts were created by admins, by hand, by an old integration nobody will admit to owning. So you run the day, export all active users, cross reference them against the SailPoint identity cube, match on email, and flag anything that doesn't match. Matched account, link them in SailPoint, and stamp the SailPoint identity ID as the external ID in the Salesforce user record. Now IAQ knows the account exists and it owns it. Okay. If you find unmatched but recently active, you have to investigate. These are missing identities or legitimate service accounts. If they are unmatched and dormant, and these are your on-friend accounts, onto the cleanup list. Clean house before you turn the automation on. And the final architecture. Picture it top to bottom. Workday sits at the top as the HR system of record. Everything flows into SailPoint Identity IQ. This is the brain. Joiner, mover, levers, orchestration, the Salesforce role model, profiles, and permissions, sets modeled as entitlements. Your uh, access reviews and approval workflows and quarterly certifications and lifecycle triggers armed on terminations. Out of the IIQ, two paths run simultaneously. Path A, governed provisioning. IIQ pushes SCIM 2 straight to Salesforce, creates, updates, deactivates accounts, assign profiles. And you have a path B, which is your safety net. On termination, IIQ disables the Entra account and Salesforce SSO slams shut. Here is a sentence to remember. SailPoint owns the governance and the provisioning record, and Entra is the authentication gate. SCIM is the delivery truck. So these tools or three tools, three lanes, and nobody's doing anyone else's job. Now, run it 50 times and pattern appears. Right? Uh, when you do it for 10 times or 20 times or 50 times, you will notice something. The answers start to rhyme. And those rhymes are your architecture principles. And they are worth naming out loud because they belong in a document and not in one architect's head. Pattern one is sensitive apps live in IGA, productivity apps live in the IDP. So your CRM, your ERP, your financial systems, your data warehouses through the IGA platform, no exceptions. Governance is non-negotiable for systems that touch regulated data or create financial risk. Your collaboration tools, your project trackers, your internal wikis, the IDP provisioning layer is fine. Full IGA governance on Confluence or Miro is a suit of armor for a pillow fight. But draw that line explicitly. Write it into your architecture principle documents. Ambiguity is exactly how apps end up in wrong lane. The pattern two that would emerge is the IDP is the speed layer and the IGA is the governance layer. So your IDPs are near real time event processing, sub 5-minute provisioning cycle. But the IGA platform is thorough. Uh, Pattern three that would emerge is reconciliation is not a one time event. You reconcile at onboarding, good. Now do it quarterly at a minimum. SaaS applications accumulate accounts that never touched your governance flows. API integration spawn service accounts, vendor create admin accounts for supports, and employees self-register on trial instances. And by the way, this is exactly what makes access certifications real. The certification campaign asks manager to review their team's access, but the aggregation job is what guarantees the review is complete. Okay, so uh, in closing, let's go back to the meeting where it all started. I told you I'll tie it all back. The one that opened with we signed the contract, provision everyone by end of month, and then there was silence. It doesn't have to end in 15 simultaneously unanswered questions. It can end with one sentence. Run it through the framework. We will have an architecture recommendation in a week. 5 questions. Does the app speak SCIM? Does access requires governance? Are there rooms inside or is a front door key enough? How fast that access have to die and who is already living in there? Answer those five honestly in order and thereout you do the right architecture. I promise you every time. Now the tools matter. OIM's workflow depth, SailPoint's governance maturity, Saviynt's catalog breadth, Entra's provisioning muscle, Okta's near real-time reflexes. But here is a distinction that makes this framework portable. The tools determine what's available to you. The framework determines what you choose. So build it, document it, and use it every single time. And the next time that meeting lands on your calendar, you will walk in with an answer instead of 15 questions. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn or you can send me an email. Both of these information I'll put in the show notes. Thank you for listening. This is Rohit, your Identity Navigator.